Welcome to the Know Better, Do Better series. Chloe and I are so excited to have a guest yet again today, and you are going to learn all the awesome things. Chloe, please introduce our guest.
I'm so excited to introduce our guest today. She's a psychologist, and you might know her from her father's work, which is her father wrote the famous book, The Millionaire Next Door. It's one of the books that I always recommend to just about everyone when it comes to learning, the keys to building wealth. And so Sarah's followed in her father's footsteps, and she's also written a book as well, The Next Millionaire Next Door. And she's done some great things in behavioral finance and just financial psychology. So I'm excited to have her on the show today.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to talk to both of you.
All right, but before we get started, Sarah, we always do this thing. It's called Trends, Taxes, and Tea. And that's where we tell either the latest trends or how to save more and pay less as it pertains to taxes, or just some good old-fashioned tea about something that's happening in pop culture that also pertains to money. So, Chloe, lay it on us. What is our trend today?
Yes, I'm excited about this one. So I was in my car listening to the radio, and I found out that Rihanna's Savage Fenty line is now estimated at $1 billion. And so, of course,
like billion with a B?
Yes, billion with a B.
Wow.
I know. And so it's very exciting news. I know we all kind of were missing her music, and we wanted her to come out with some more music, but she's in the business world now. So I completely understand, why she's working hard on, she has her beauty line, she has her lingerie line. But yeah, it's worth $1 billion now. Her estimated net worth, of course, she doesn't own, 100% of it, but she's partnered with some other people, but her estimated net worth is about $600 million. And she's on her way to being a billionaire. So that's exciting news.
That is exciting news. And speaking of billionaires, Tyler Perry became Hollywood's newest billionaire last fall. This is, of course, according to Forbes. So his wealth comes from 5 key areas. So cash and investments, which we talk about quite a bit on this show. His stake in video on demand service with BET. BET Plus, I got to say, because, there's all these apps and things out there nowadays. And then also Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta. So congratulations to Tyler.
Awesome. So yeah, let's jump right into our main topic with Dr. Sarah Fallaw. And so yeah, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great. Just tell us a little bit about your background, kind of the work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, my background's in psychology and industrial psychology. So I spent the first part of my career using psychological assessments in the hiring process. So I worked for a tech company here in Atlanta. It was more like a startup, and they had all kinds of folks running around, but some of those were industrial psychologists, and we created assessments. Of course, in the sort of background was always my dad and his work. I really, didn't want to focus on that. He was, studying wealthy people, and that, I was out trying to do my own thing, and just didn't seem all that interesting. But, later on in my career, I realized that you could actually use assessments or tests, like personality tests, to uncover aspects of your characteristics that will allow you to build wealth. And so we started working together kind of early on. Then we started talking about doing a book, kind of later on. And unfortunately, he was killed by a drunk driver here in Atlanta back in 2015. So he didn't see the end of that work. But again, part of all that we do at the company that I have now, DataPoints, as well as the research that I continue to do in this area, started with his sort of focus on, this group of affluent Americans that essentially built wealth on their own. And that's where a lot of what I do today comes from too.
That's great. And just for a little bit of background for people who don't know, The Millionaire Next Door was written back in the 90s, I believe, Sarah.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And so basically Dr. Thomas Stanley, he studied a lot of self-made millionaires and just, wanted to know, how did they build their wealth? How did they maintain their wealth? What are some of the habits that they have that attributed to building that wealth over time? And so he was actually, kind of shocked. And I think everybody was a little shocked to see that millionaires typically don't have like the fancy cars and the big houses and all the, fancy jewelry and just all these things. They don't show their wealth like we think they do. So they could actually just be your next door neighbor who's, sitting on millions of dollars and you don't know it. So
yeah, exactly. Sorry.
Good.
Exactly. So some of the, the stories he would share with us when we were little were things like, hey, I've had this big focus group up in New York for all these wealthy people that these banks have invited, and they didn't want any of the fancy food that we put out. They wanted, a Coke and a Budweiser. Like, they didn't want the fancy stuff. They wanted, just basic stuff, just like, we would want. And it was just kind of interesting. I mean, like you said, it was a shock to him, certainly. And then, of course, to, the rest of folks, given the popularity of the book. I mean, it was on the New York Times bestseller list for something like 170 or something weeks. So it's definitely was eye-opening.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it definitely changed the way I think about money too. And I wrote a blog post about that. So we'll share that in the show notes as well as some resources from Sarah's work. But yeah, just the other thing I want to talk about was just to get started, what are some of the most interesting findings, that you and your father, saw in your research with working with wealthy or talking to wealthy clients?
Yeah, I think, you touched on a little bit of them, in just a second ago, but I think that some of the most interesting things do focus on what we buy and what sort of the artifacts of wealth. And, I think even today, and certainly I have teenagers, so they definitely focus on, brands and, wanting to have the latest and greatest. But, again, his work was groundbreaking in the fact that these millionaires were driving, pickup trucks and Hondas and Toyotas. Meanwhile, everybody wants, a Tesla or whatever, for whatever reason. But I think, again, a lot of the research around income, and it's actually a predictor of, prestige models of cars versus net worth. Whereas, those that really have high net worth wealth, savings and all of that, they tend to drive, more modest cars compared to those that have a high income but don't have a lot in the bank. Those are two different components. So I think those were one of the main interesting finding from his work. But the others had to do with the influence of our parents. When we started doing research together, that was one of the key areas we focused on, was looking at, how if your mom and dad, or mom in particular, if they were frugal and they talked about finances and they helped you learn, that could lead to net worth in the future, higher net worth compared to others. So, some of those findings were pretty interesting too.
I think it's so cool what you just said about the idea of income versus net worth. I think this is something that people do not focus on enough, or even have a really good understanding of. The idea of income being what you actually earn, and you can be a great earner, but if you spend everything you earn, you're not going to be wealthy. And that's why in the financial world, we talk a lot more in terms of net worth. And net worth being, for those that don't know, this idea, if you took and liquidated everything you had and turned it into cash, paid off all your debts, what would be left over? So what is the true value of the things that you have? I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I think even today when you read articles, like anything you read on the internet, like, you have to really think, are they talking about income, like how much I make every year? Are they talking about wealth? And I think that's where, again, a lot of people get tripped up, because even journalists don't talk about it the right way sometimes. So you really do have to kind of dissect what they're saying and to understand, what's really true.
Sarah, can you share with us some of the other kind of myths or misconceptions that people have about building wealth? I know you mentioned, you kind of scratched the surface there, but I know you've got lots to tell us.
Yeah. So, I think that some of the things, certainly that my father looked at over his lifetime of doing this kind of work was things like, really internalizing the idea that, if you're in a certain group, or you're a woman, or you've had this kind of experience, that you would not be able to build wealth. I think that's partially because of what society has been telling us for a long, long time, so we start internalizing that and believing it. But certainly what we know is that it's behaviors that drive wealth. And anyone can elicit those behaviors, or anyone can actually take advantage of some of the things that you should be doing to build wealth. Now, that's not to say that it's not easier or harder for certain groups, absolutely. But the idea that you kind of take this on and say, well, I'm a woman, there's no way I can start a business, especially in financial services, no one's going to talk to me, those kinds of things. So I think that was certainly one of the ones that certainly he saw throughout his research, and that we talked about in the book as well. One of the others, again, I think we talked about this a little bit, was just judging people by what they're wearing, driving, and buying. We have to explain this to our kids, and it's interesting to see, again, teenagers, right? But, they reflect a lot of what we do too, right? They're not, and one of the things is just kind of judging others by where they're going on vacation, how many vacations they're taking. Well, they've got to be wealthy. Well, are they saving for their retirement? Can they send their kids to school with some funds, and that kind of thing? You don't know. And so I think really, again, one of the myths is just that everyone that's wealthy drives a certain car. Again, we talked about that. Or that they, take certain amount of vacations and things like that. Those tend to be the ones that come up the most in terms of those myths.
Yeah, that's so true. That just these are all kind of behaviors, and it all boils down to the behaviors that you have when it comes to building wealth, and they are things that can be improved. They're things that you can learn over time, and so yeah, I wanted you to kind of walk through some of the behaviors that predict financial success. I know through your work with DataPoints, and I'm a user of DataPoints with my clients. We kind of look at those 6 different areas. So I'd love for you to break those down and kind of explain what that means.
Yeah, so what we've tried to do is understand, when you manage your financial life, what are those characteristics or competencies that allow you to do that really well, or what are the things you need to improve on? And that's where that 6-factor model comes into play. And so there are a lot of what we've talked about kind of touches on some of them. So one of them is being frugal, which is essentially just being, smart about your money when you're spending money. Another one is being confident in your choices. And that confidence can come through study, through working with a financial professional that has your best interest in mind, through, just deciding that you're going to learn more. And so you can build your confidence. It certainly is the case that those that tend to be confident in how they make financial decisions tend to be more successful. One of them kind of touches on what we just talked about, that social indifference. So the more I can ignore what people around me are doing, my neighbors, the new car they just bought, all that kind of stuff, the more likely the higher the likelihood that I'll be able to build wealth on my own and sustain that wealth for the long term. So if I can kind of ignore what, the Joneses are doing, or really what I see on social media, right? Like especially in when we're kind of all separated and we're all virtual, a lot of what we know about what our high school friends or our neighbors are doing is coming from social media. So the more we can ignore that, the more successful we'll be. A couple of the other ones include things like planning, monitoring what's going on in your financial life, not having your head in the sand, like actually knowing like what you're spending your money on and where your investments are going. And, again, even if you're working, with someone, having knowledge and being aware of what they're doing. And certainly, again, any financial professional you're working with should be, sharing that information like you guys do with your clients. But having some awareness of what's happening, and then also just being able to focus on, what's happening, especially those details. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes I get, I want someone else to care about the details, but the bottom line is the more you can kind of focus on those financial details, the better. And then the last one is just, again, we talked about this a little bit, but having the sort of, attitude that you can actually build wealth, that you can do this. Generally those that tend to view financial success as something that they can actually impact tend to be better at it. And versus those that say, hey, there's nothing I can do about this. I've had all these things happen. There's just nothing I can do to get past this. That attitude and sort of those corresponding behaviors can really set you back.
Those are so like all the gems. I hope that people have their notebook out, that they're writing this down. Two things that I want to circle back to was one, you mentioned, what financial planners do for people. And our job, and I love because you're not doing financial planning, that you said, like, this is not us telling Sarah what to say. It's that we are not here to enable you. We are here to educate you. You should not be with a financial planner and not know anything about what they're doing. You should have a good idea of how to articulate what your plan is, where your stuff is invested, what you should be doing. And that all comes from like being a little bit more hands-on, which was the next point you made right after that, was about being focused. And so this investment of time and understanding some of what is going on is such an important part. And I think so often, like you said, with all these apps and things out there, it's like set it and forget it. Hit a button and someone cleans your house for you. Hit a button and someone picks you up and takes you somewhere. There's so much that we put on autopilot that we don't realize how important it is to stay engaged with our finances. And even when engaging with a professional, to be educated via that professional instead of just the hit the button, you do it, you figure it out. I don't want anything I just want you to make me rich. That is not me and Chloe's job.
Yeah, I tell clients all the time, just paying us for it is not going to solve your problems. Like, you have to put in the work, and you have to be engaged and focused on what's going on in your financial life.
And just to circle back to this other part, I feel like you've kind of covered it already, but we are not hardwired to these behaviors. We can, in fact, change them. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, so even though what we're talking about is this kind of personality, like generally I don't want to focus on details, let's say. The bottom line is there is a behavior connected to that. And if you can improve that behavior, if you can say, I'm going to set aside 30 minutes each week and I'm going to check these 3 accounts, that I'm just going to do it week after week, that's going to lead to success. And that is something you can change. It's going to be harder for some of us, especially those of us that get influenced, let's say, by what others are doing. That's going to be a little more challenging, but we're all unique. But what we do know, again, through the research that we've done, is that if you can improve how you're sort of, behaving and the choices you're making related to those 6 factors, the likelihood that you'll build and sustain wealth are higher. So there's an incentive there, even if it's not maybe your favorite thing to do, to sit down and look through everything and all that.
Yeah, definitely. And so one of the things I want to focus on particularly is the influence side of things, and social indifference, and just the influence from social media. And there's so many different ways that we're conditioned to think that we should spend our money this way or that way, or we should possess certain things. So can you give us some examples of just how people are influenced with their buying decisions, and how that is a factor in building wealth?
Yeah, this all comes from kind of the realm of social psychology, right? So how we're, how we interact with others, and we all want to be a part of a group, and we all want to be part of some kind of community, and that's just the nature that we all sort of share. But the problem comes in when we're unduly influenced, right? We've got a goal, but everyone else is going in a different direction. How are we going to deal with that? There's a great book, Robert Cialdini's Influence book. I reference it all the time. Things like, he breaks down influence in terms of 6 different areas and six different ways that we can be influenced by people around us. And, a couple of the ways are kind of, from the 90s or the 80s when I grew up, right? Like, oh, buy this today, there's only 3 left. Or, I'm a doctor and I say that it's great to do, buy this new, whatever it is, vitamin or what have you. That kind of authority and scarcity, that's fine. But today we have social media, and today we have people that we know, love, and trust that are telling us and showing us what they're buying, driving, and wearing 24 hours a day. And some of the more powerful components of that influence, that social influence components that Robert Cialdini mentioned, include things like liking. If I like you and you're telling me something, I'll be more likely to do it. consistency. So if I see these things over and over again, then I'm going to want to buy them. And again, status and social components too. So, what we know from research that's out there, again, this isn't necessarily research that we've conducted, but research that's out there that says that the more likely you are to just say, I'm searching for recommendations on Facebook. Like, I'm not buying anything based on it, but I'm just going to look for recommendations. I think it's like you're 40% more likely to actually make that purchase than if you didn't go search on Facebook. Some of the other research that's out there, 81% of us believe that our friends and family give us good recommendations. And so if we, get that recommendation, if we get that recommendation from a friend or family member, we're going to be more likely to make a purchase. And again, if you know that you're influenced by social media, you're like, I do. I buy things, I do things that I wouldn't do, but I see them on social media, then you're 4 times more likely to make purchases. So there are all kinds of studies and research out there that show us that. And of course, social media is it's like a laboratory, right? We hate to think that, but we certainly are in one. And so those are some of the ways that we get influenced out of the goals that we've set for ourselves by what other people are doing.
Yeah, that's so true. And just with social media alone, they make their money off of advertising. Mm-hmm. And so I'm personally guilty of falling prey to all of the advertisements and
what was the last thing you purchased? What did you fall prey to most recently, Chloe?
But yeah, I saw some cute clothes and so I bought a shirt.
Mine was a sports bra. I totally, I just kept getting advertised like the super duper. I forgot it. I don't even know the name of the brand anymore, but I just kept seeing it. And I'm like, it does look like a really great sports bra. And it's literally like you need a PhD to get it on your body. I spent like $80 on a sports bra that I pretty much never wear because it is too complicated to put on.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, and it's so funny. We always think about, we have conversations with our friends, or we'll search for something in Google, and the next thing you know, we go on social media and there's an advertisement. So yeah, it really is a machine, like you said, Sarah.
Yep. Yeah.
Siri
very
is
powerful.
Always listening. Siri
yep. They're listening right now. Yeah.
All right. What about influences as it pertains to our investing decisions? So that is something that's super duper popular now. Everybody's trying to figure out how to invest, where to invest, what to invest in. How can influences affect our investing decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, it keeps us on like Reddit looking at Wall Street bets all day, like just to see what they're doing because it's interesting, right? No, but certainly the influence of herd mentality is one of those cognitive biases, one of those ways in which we're influenced into making decisions that we probably shouldn't. What we found in our research is that those of us who tend to be a little more emotional, a little less confident in our decision making, and really maybe have more of a short-term view of investing, we are the ones that tend, and I say we because that tends to be me, a little more emotional about things. We tend to make investing decisions that aren't so great. And so we're influenced by what's happening around us. And because we maybe don't have as much knowledge, we're not as confident, we're a little emotional, we start making decisions that don't align with our long-term goals. That's generally how we see influence occur, especially when there's, again, market trends like, I need to go buy AMC and GameStop and whatever's the latest and greatest, Bitcoin, whatever it might be. And again, all those things are fine if you're thinking about them and you're working with someone that can help you, and that's actually part of a long-term strategy. But where we get influenced into those decisions is, when we get caught up in the moment, and that tends to be where we see influence really impact investors specifically.
Yeah. So what are some practical ways that we can improve our ability to tune out, what people are buying, wearing, driving, or even what they're investing in?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good question. I need to tackle that one myself. No, I think that really what we've seen, and again, if you look at the sort of goal setting research that's out there, whether it's in the psychology realm or the financial planning realm, Generally, creating goals for yourself that are meaningful and impactful is sort of the first place to start. And that doesn't mean necessarily that we're talking about a financial goal. So it's not, I'm saving for X, because that could be 30 years away, and who knows what that does. But instead, things that are more meaningful to your life, like I want to be able to be less stressed when I'm at home with my children, or I want to be able to provide for my aging parents, and that's really important to me. If you can start there and then work backwards, and again, that's why there are folks that are doing this, like you guys, with clients, to say, all right, how are we going to get you there? And then you can look at the ways in which your personality might challenge that plan, and you can work around it. So I think we've talked about this, but first of all, being aware, first of all, knowing where you might have fall into some pitfalls is really the first step. If I know that I shouldn't be on E-Trade all day, like making adjustments, let's say, that's something that I need to stay away from. That's not a great example, but you see what I mean. If there are or if I have a pattern of behaviors that I know are going to keep me from that long-term goal that's so critically important to me, then I'm better able to make adjustments to how I'm behaving. Now, a part of that is habit. So, developing really good habits, because a lot of the things we do financially are rote. Like, we're not even thinking about them. We're just doing them. We don't even realize it. Not the sports bra purchase, but maybe again, I on Saturday nights, I sit down and I just kind of see what's new on Amazon, and, all of a sudden you've got, 20 packages showing up on Monday morning. Maybe that's just a habit. And so understanding that it's something that you're doing without even really thinking about it is also part of what needs to happen in order to get past some of those, those pitfalls.
Yeah, it sounds like they said awareness is important, self-reflection is important. What is it that I need? What is it that I want? What are my values? What are the things that I value, that I hold near and dear to my heart, so that I can accomplish my goals? And then, like you said, what is getting in the way of me being able to accomplish the things that I want? I think that is a huge deal, and that can, you said, definitely impact your finances. But the other thing is just changing that behavior. So what can we do to change our behavior to be more conducive to building wealth? So okay, I've done my reflection. I've decided like you said, buy too much on Amazon. I want to change that. How do I actually make the changes to my financial behavior so that I can really, I think most clients, like you said, they come to us and they want to build wealth, but, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I had clients that, a year in, 2 years in, still were not much closer to their goal, or had only made very small change in comparison to what we could do if, they were actually implementing the plan. So how can I help push them in that direction?
Push them along,
what can
right?
People do? Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to that. So around kind of like the financial coaching side, for sure. But one of the things, again, if we're just talking about some of those maybe automatic behaviors that we don't even realize, we're doing. First, if you can kind of figure out what those are, right? Okay, I've got some of these things that are happening. Of course, that takes looking at your finances, right? We got to look and see where those things are happening. But learning what those triggers are, like maybe there's something going on in your life that's leading you to make those decisions or those choices, uncovering what those are, replacing those behaviors with something else. So if you look at there are a lot of different habit books. Atomic Habits by James Clear is one of them. Charles Duhigg's Habit book is a great one. And in both of those, they talk about, again, from a psychological perspective, they're talking about replacing certain behaviors with others. So do something else. It's just like if you think about, okay, I don't need to be in the kitchen because if you're looking to, lose weight or what have you, I don't want to be here because this is going to be a trigger for me to start, snacking or whatever. It's kind of the same thing related to finances, especially, again, if you're in a position where you're making the same decisions over and over again. The other point is, if we think about let's say that there's a change in your life and you've always done something some way. So every year we go on 4 vacations. Maybe that's, something that you've done and you've been able to do with your family or your spouse, or maybe on your own. You've done that every year. And all of a sudden you are experiencing a job loss or maybe the death of a spouse or something like that. You have to have permission, or give yourself permission to make new habits, make new traditions within your family in order to meet your financial goals. And I think that, again, having someone that can share with you that it's okay to make those changes because you have this really important goal that you're trying to reach is also critical. This is where the clinical side and the coaching side of psychology kind of come into play. But those would be my suggestions, at least to start with.
Ooh, I think you just hit some real key gems here about this, like the role that trauma plays in your life. So, that trauma being something that a boyfriend broke up with you and you're 35 and single and it's like, woe is me. I got to go get nicer clothes, of the fanciest gym membership to, catch me a guy sort of thing. And you're not realizing kind of like the narrative that's going in your head. It's just like, no, that guy was a deadbeat. You don't need to do all these other things. You don't need to change who you are, sort of deal that, causes that spending. But that's where, like you said, the awareness comes. And then you gave like the travel example, and that totally resonated with me. People don't think of travel as trauma. It was like, oh, you're privileged when you get to travel. But, in 2019, I went on 11 trips. In 2020, I went to 11 countries. Let me just I went to more than 11 trips.
That's awesome.
2020, I went to 2 countries, and I am legitimately traumatized by it. But, like what behavior do you decide to do instead? Do you stump your feet and, spend doing something else that's not within the lines of what your goals or your values or vision was? Or do you redirect yourself in some other way to find like something productive to be able to do instead of this particular thing that was the thing you need to do? And, oh, by the way, like you said, 11 trips, that's I didn't get to do 11. So what did I get to do with that money instead? And how can I make new changes and new traditions in my life? So I thought those are really good points that you brought up there.
Yeah, I thought about just, with my family, like we don't really exchange Christmas gifts anymore. And, that was something that we started years ago. And, when the children were all little and, that it was important to give them a traditional Christmas and, make it a special day. But as we all got older, we just realized we were spending all this money and, just and the obligation to have to buy everybody something and, and just, it was just too much. So we went to, just pulling names at first, and then we just decided to do no gifts. And when I tell people that, they think I'm insane because they're like, have you checked off your Christmas shopping list? And I'm like, well, I don't have one. So,
gosh, but yeah. Oh, sorry. You're probably so less stressed during that time too. Like you're probably enjoying that time much more than those of us who continue to have to do that. We're at the point where we're drawing names, and I'm hoping we're going to get to that. Hey, let's just enjoy this time together instead of being stressed about it. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like the major decision we have is what are we going to eat?
Perfect. Yep.
So yeah, but that's really good. I think another thing too that I wanted to just mention that you brought up was just the influence of your friends and how important it is to be around people who share the same goals and who share the same values, and someone who's gonna like I say with some of my friends, I need somebody to slap the muffin out of my hand or slap the cake. It's like we need people to smack the credit card out of our hand every once in a while if we're going to make a decision that's not in line with our goals. And also, just even looking at your spouse. I know your dad did some research around, a lot of the millionaires were married, and just the influence that, if you have a spouse that spends a lot versus a spouse that's more frugal, and how that influences your decision to build wealth. So all those things are important, just who you surround yourself with.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially related to the couples side. I think that, a lot of the millionaires featured, especially, again, this was like, the research he was doing was in the 80s and early 90s, but, they had a spouse, for example, that took on a lot of those characteristics that we talked about earlier. So they tended to be frugal, and they were, budgeting, and they were just, really into the minutia, while their spouse, who tended to be a man, was out, being this entrepreneur a lot of times, or C-level person, or, other professional. But they had someone actually paying attention to the details. And again, that is so important within a household. And if you're not in a household, then developing those skills is something that's important. But you are right that the social side, having friends and having even neighbors you can think about that are kind of on the same page, in terms of those goals and values and things like that, can be really helpful as you're trying to build and sustain wealth.
I just have one final question in that realm, is like, what is your tip for someone that has someone that they're listening to this and they're like, yeah, so-and-so is a bad influence, or my spouse is a bad influence. I know for me, I get pressure all the time because I drive a 2008 car. And my friends are constantly like, girl, you need to upgrade, you have to do better. And, I'm able to kind of shake that off. But how do you, if you're not in a situation and you feel the pressure of someone telling you that all the time, like, what's kind of step number one to navigating those relationships?
That's a good question. Yeah. So, I have to think about that one. Again, I'll go back to the fact that I'm not a clinical psychologist nor a counseling psychologist. So I'm not sure again, I know enough to be dangerous in those realms. I think that you have to decide what is the goal worth fighting for. And if you can continue that relationship with your friends or a friend, or, loved one, again, if you're in a relationship, and you can continue that relationship, but also meet those goals, then that's okay. But if you can't, then you have some tough choices to make, because again, like we've been talking about the whole time, there is an influence on you. There's going to be an influence in terms of how they're, kind of dictating the way in which you're spending and saving and so forth. We, just again, thinking about where we live here in Atlanta, outside of Atlanta, in the area we do, we drive one of our cars is a 2003 Toyota.
You got
me
beat.
I mean, it's like, yeah, we get the same kind of comments, Lauren, like, what are you doing? Like, I can't believe that, it's like, well, it goes, and, what are we going to do? But, again, we're we have sort of the wherewithal to be able to say we don't care, but not everybody's in that boat. And so, that's a tough one. That's a tough decision to make. Is it, are you going to go after this kind of meaningful goal in your life? And is it, something that's really well thought out and that could potentially change your life as well as the rest of your family's life, let's say, or future family? Or are you, going to keep that relationship? I mean, those are tough questions, and it would really kind of depend on a lot of different things. So I wish I had a magic wand for that one, but I don't.
Yeah, I think it is a really tough one to navigate, and it's the idea of, how important are these people to you, and how important it is to get them on your team. If you're heading in the right direction and they're heading in the wrong direction, how can you pull them along with you? And at what point do you say, like, hey, I'm tired of trying to pull you in the right direction. I'm going to go my separate way, or I'm just not going to talk to you about this thing anymore.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, and if you're single, I mean, it's something to think about too. When you are choosing a spouse, that's something that's important. How do they, what are their behaviors and habits around money, and do they have those habits that are conducive to building wealth, and do they have that goal of creating wealth with you? So,
yeah, that's
good.
Huge.
Any final thoughts or pieces of advice for the audience?
Well, I think that just thinking about your sort of financial life as another job that you have that you may or may not want is the kind of the way that we think about it at DataPoints, and the way that we think about how you can actually understand yourself related to that job. Like, give yourself a pass. It's okay if you don't, have all the knowledge and all the kind of skills, so to speak, but, working on building those is what's going to help make the difference between reaching those goals or, kind of having them pass you by. So definitely focus on, how you can improve even just a little bit related to those areas that we talked about earlier.
Awesome. So before we wrap up, how can the listeners get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Twitter, so at Sarah Fallaw, or on LinkedIn also. So happy to connect. And or you can stop by our website, datapoints.com. We have some, resources and things like that. Or you can check out the Next Millionaire Next Door on Amazon.
Yeah, and like I said, I use DataPoints with clients, and so I'll put a couple of little shorter versions of the assessments that I use with my clients in the show notes if anyone's interested in just taking those quick assessments. And then I have some other resources and things that I'll share as well.
This has been so amazing. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on. We cannot leave, though, without doing our money quote for the day. And Chloe found us a really good one by none other than your father. Chloe, what is the money quote for today?
Yes, and we found out this is from Sarah. This is one of her father's favorite quotes. Money should never change one's value. Making money is only a report card. It's a way to tell how you're doing.
Sarah, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think that, again, it goes back to this idea of these goals or these things in your life that are more important than money. Money certainly allows you to do some of those things and work towards them, but again, it's not everything, and it shouldn't be sort of dictating the rest of your life. And I think that, again, his focus was, hey, even if you have a high income, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't let that change who you are and change your values. And again, there's sort of a greater purpose, and money's only one indicator of how things are going.
Yeah, I love that so much. I always say to people, you don't have to have money to have value. You have to have values to have value. Mm-hmm. And it's, my version of the same sort of thing is you got to first understand what it is that is important to you, and then use money as a tool to get you there. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much for being on. Chloe, anything you want to say before we peace out?
Yeah, I'll just share for our next episode. We're going to dig into how your spending habits impact your ability to build wealth. So we talked about some of the habits and things. In this episode, we're going to dive into some specific spending habits. So it's just, those big expenses that kind of you don't think about that really impede your ability to build wealth. And so what are those expenses and how can you reduce them?
Yes, and I think that's a perfect one to build off of. So we got your mind right with Sarah today, and now we're going to dig deeper. Now you do the reflection between now and the next episode so we can really get into these expenses, and you'll be open to receiving what Chloe and I are going to say in the next one about changing your spending habits.
Exactly.